What if you were told that a conflict that has been raging for over a century was rooted in something as old as time itself? Land. Yes, it's hard to believe, isn't it? But that's precisely the crux of the Israel-Palestine conflict, a dispute that has been smoldering for more than 100 years. This is not just a regional issue. Its ripple effects are felt globally, influencing policies, politics, and people far beyond its geographic boundaries. It's a subject that's often misunderstood, shrouded in layers of complexity and years of history. Many see it as a religious conflict which, while not entirely false, oversimplifies the matter. This conflict is about land, identity, and the struggle for self-determination. It's about two nations, two peoples, each with their own narratives of dispossession and survival. It's a story that's as heartbreaking as it is complicated. So, what's the story behind this century-old conflict? Let's journey back in time to find out. Our story begins in the late 19th and early 20th century, a time when the world was a very different place. As the sun set on the 1800s, a new political movement was taking shape. This movement, known as Zionism, was born out of the longing of the Jewish people for a homeland. They yearned for a place where they could live free from persecution, and for many, that place was the historical land of Israel. But the Jewish people were not the only ones with their eyes on this land. The Arabs, who had been living there for centuries, also considered it their home. The stage was set for a clash of national aspirations. In the early 20th century, Europe was a perilous place for Jews. Anti-Semitism was rife, and the horrors of the Holocaust loomed on the horizon. In response to the plight of European Jews, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917. This document expressed Britain's support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Meanwhile, the British had also made promises to the Arabs. During World War I, the British had encouraged the Arabs to revolt against the Ottoman Empire, promising them independence. But when the dust of the war settled, the British instead established the British Mandate of Palestine, effectively controlling the region. The tensions between Jews and Arabs grew. The Jews, motivated by the horrors they had faced in Europe and the promise of the Balfour Declaration, began to immigrate to Palestine in large numbers. The Arabs, feeling betrayed and threatened, resisted. As the years passed, these tensions escalated. Clashes became more frequent and more violent. The British, unable to control the unrest, decided to hand the problem over to the United Nations. As World War II ended, a new conflict was just about to begin. 1947 marked a crucial turning point in the history of both Israel and Palestine. This was the year when the United Nations, in an attempt to resolve the escalating tensions, proposed a partition plan. This plan, though controversial, sought to divide the British Mandate of Palestine into two separate states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem under international administration. However, the plan did not go down well. The Arab nations rejected it, objecting to the notion of a Jewish state on what they considered Arab land. The Jewish Agency, on the other hand, accepted the proposal, albeit with reservations. With the end of the British Mandate in 1948, the Jewish Agency declared the creation of the State of Israel. This was a momentous event, marking the first time in nearly 2,000 years that there was a sovereign Jewish state. But this was not a moment of universal celebration. It was also a moment of deep tension and conflict. The declaration of Israel's statehood triggered a war, known as the Arab-Israeli War, or the War of Independence, depending on which narrative one follows. The war was brutal and bloody, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The end of the war in 1949 saw Israel emerging victorious, expanding its territories beyond the UN partition plan. But the creation of Israel also led to a massive displacement of Palestinians. Hundreds of thousands were either fled or were expelled from their homes, their lands, and their lives as they knew it. This became known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, a term still used by Palestinians today to describe the loss of their ancestral homeland. The year 1948 ended with two people in search of a homeland and a conflict that was far from over. It was the beginning of a long and complex struggle over land, identity, and history, a struggle that continues to shape the region and its people, even today. In the following decades, the conflict only intensified. Dive into the 60s, and you'll find a landmark event, the Six-Day War. This was a brief yet significant conflict that saw Israel, in a matter of 6 days, successfully take on Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. The aftermath? An occupation of significant territories, including the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. Israel's victory, however, did not quell the strife. Instead, it ushered in a new era of resistance. A major player was the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO, which rose to prominence in the late 60s. The PLO represented the voice of the Palestinian people, demanding recognition and autonomy. Fast forward to the 70s and we encounter the Yom Kippur War. On the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, a coalition of Arab states, led by Egypt and Syria, launched a surprise attack on Israel. Although the war ended in a military stalemate, it had far-reaching political repercussions. It highlighted the vulnerabilities of Israel and led to a shift in the global perception of the conflict. These wars and their aftermath led to a significant shift in the geopolitical landscape. A new wave of tension and conflict emerged in the occupied territories, leading to a spiral of violence, retaliation, and resistance that continues to this day. The occupation of Palestinian territories has been a contentious issue, sparking international outcry and debates about human rights and state sovereignty. Yet, amidst the turmoil and the cries for justice, the reality remains. Millions of Palestinians live under occupation, their lives marked by uncertainty and conflict. Over the years, there have been numerous attempts to broker peace, to chart a path towards a two-state solution. But these attempts have often faltered in the face of political realities, deep-seated mistrust, and a complex web of issues that go beyond borders and territory. Despite numerous peace attempts, a resolution still appears to be a distant dream. Scene script. Fast forward to the 21st century, where the conflict continues to be a part of everyday life for Israelis and Palestinians. In the bustling humdrum of what we know as the present, the Israel-Palestine tussle remains at the forefront, with the status of Jerusalem, Israeli settlements, and the state of Palestinian governance being the crux of the issue. Let's start with Jerusalem. The city, with its rich tapestry of history and spirituality, holds immense significance for both nations. Yet the question of its rightful ownership remains a bone of contention. Israel claims the entire city as its capital, while Palestinians aspire for East Jerusalem to be the capital of their future state. This dichotomy has led to a stalemate, with the international community caught in the crossfire of diplomatic disagreements. Moving on to the Israeli settlements, these are essentially communities of Israelis that have been established in territories occupied by Israel since the Six-Day War of 1967. These settlements are considered illegal under international law, yet they continue to grow, creating a web of complexity that further entangles the peace process. Lastly, let's talk about Palestinian governance. The Palestinian territories are currently split between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. This political divide, coupled with economic hardships, has only intensified the struggle of the Palestinian people, making the road to resolution even more challenging. But what does all this mean for the ordinary people? Well, amidst the political wrangling and diplomatic discourse, it is the common individuals who bear the brunt of this seemingly unending conflict. Lives are disrupted, futures are uncertain, and dreams are often overshadowed by the harsh reality of the situation. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a deep-rooted issue, entrenched in history, politics, and emotions. It's a tale of two nations entwined in a dance of destiny, a dance that has been going on for decades. Yet the music seems to be far from over. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a complex issue with no easy solutions. So, we've taken a whirlwind tour of a century-old conflict rooted in a struggle for land and identity. We've traced the birth of two nations, Israel and Palestine, from the ashes of World War II and their tumultuous journey through the decades. We've delved into the heart of their struggle for a place they both call home, and the tragic repercussions of the ongoing conflict that has marked their history. We've examined the present scenario, a delicate balance of power, fraught with tension, yet brimming with potential for resolution. It's a complex issue, with deep historical roots and a multitude of factors that continue to shape it. We've explored the narratives, the dreams, the hopes, and the fears that define this conflict. It's a tale of two nations, bound by a shared history and a common yearning for a peaceful homeland. And as we stand on the brink of yet another decade, one can only hope for a future where peace prevails in this troubled land.